when I first arrived in Tela, I was struck by how beautiful the bay was. Incredible place, beautiful bay, the lovely beach. But when I stood on that beach and I looked out to sea, my first impression was I thought I'd wasted my time. I thought there is no way there's a reef out there. Absolutely no way. Everything about Tela is screaming, no reefs here. Reefs can't survive here. Certainly not a healthy reef anyway.
Hello and welcome to Telerif Testimonials, where a select group of people who have visited our marine ecosystem can share their thoughts and ideas about these unique and very special reefs that we have in Tela. Joining us today from the UK is Dr. Dan Exton, Head of Research of Operation Wallacea, lecturer at the University of Essex, and Associate Researcher of the University of Oxford. Hi, Dr. Exton, how are you doing?
I'm lovely to see you. Very good, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. How's the weather over there?
Cold, wet, so quite good for the UK.
Beautiful and sunny over here. You should be here right now.
I know, I wish I was.
So, I thought maybe we should start by talking about yourself. And maybe you can let us know about yourself and how you got involved in the world of conservation.
Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Dr. Dan Exton. I'm head of research at an organisation called Operation Wallacea, who are a UK-based organisation who runs biodiversity conservation projects all around the world. And that's how I got involved in this career, really. I got involved with them as a student, went out to Indonesia, fell in love with the place, and have stayed involved ever since. I'm also an honorary lecturer at the University of Essex in the UK, and also an associate researcher at the University of Oxford. I'm pretty much involved in anything to do with coral reefs. I'm fascinated by them. I'll study their ecology, I'll study their conservation, you name it, I'm interested in it. And I've been very lucky enough to spend the last 9 years working in Tela with you and your organisation. So I felt very privileged to do that.
So take us back 9 years ago when you first came to Tela and you first saw the reef, and what was the first things that came to your mind, your first thoughts that came to your mind back then, and what you've learned now about this reef?
I'm going to take you one step further back than that, Antal, because when I first arrived in Tela, I was struck by how beautiful the bay was. Incredible place, beautiful bay, the lovely beach. But when I stood on that beach and I looked out to sea, my first impression was I thought I'd wasted my time. I thought there is no way there's a reef out there. Absolutely no way. Everything about Tela is screaming, no reefs here. Reefs can't survive here. Certainly not a healthy reef anyway. But you were so enthusiastic that I thought, well, I'll humour him. I'll go out to the reef and I'll have a look and see what he's got. And we took the boat out, and I remember looking in, couldn't see anything below the surface, could just see the water, and I still thought, there's not going to be anything down here. And then as we descended underwater, as we got deeper and deeper, suddenly this just incredible picture of a reef just started to emerge out of the gloom. And it was something I'd never seen before. I've been lucky enough to work on coral reefs all around the world, and I've seen some incredible places, and I've still never seen anything quite like Tela. I've seen other amazing reefs, but different to Tela. And after just an hour of swimming around this reef with you showing me around, you started to pick out some of these really unique things about the reef that made it so unusual. How healthy the coral is, how much coral there is there, which would be unusual even over in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. In the Caribbean, it's incredible. The fact you've got all these sea urchins which are supposed to have died off, and scientists all around the Caribbean are saying they don't really exist anymore. Well, they definitely exist in Tela. And all this is happening on a reef where the environmental conditions are completely the opposite of what you expect for a coral reef. No crystal clear blue water. You're getting this big city pumping its pollution into the water, all this agricultural runoff. So I think to have somewhere that special existing under such threat, it really is quite breathtaking for someone like me to see.
And people here always ask me, what makes this reef so different, and why should the local people care so much about their reef, and why should the conservation community in general care so much about reefs in general, but this reef specifically. Why this reef is so special, and why we should care so much about this reef specifically?
It's a really good question, and to be honest, there are so many things about this reef that we still don't understand. That's part of what I'm trying to do out there. But when you start to list the reasons why that reef is unique, it starts to build up to be quite a long list. This sea urchin I mentioned earlier, absolutely key species for Caribbean coral reefs, and they were almost wiped out by a disease in the 1980s. And that was one of the reasons why reefs around the Caribbean started to deteriorate. In Tela, you've got this incredibly healthy population of this urchin, so it's probably no surprise that the coral reef is doing so well as a result of that. So one reason would be you've got this healthy population of a really, really rare species. And when you have a population like that, just like with the panda, the rarer a species becomes, the more important it becomes to protect what of it is left. You've also got these huge beds of what's called a Acropora palmata corals, which are everyone's picture of a coral with branches sticking out. And it's these corals that give reefs their big three-dimensional structure. And that's why so many fish and invertebrates and other species can call a coral reef home. Now, that's another species that's been very nearly wiped out around the Caribbean from disease and storm damage and things like that. And in Tela, somewhere where I wouldn't have thought any corals would live, you've got these really extensive beds of Acropora palmata. And we really don't know what they're doing there. But every year, these Acropora palmata will be pumping their eggs and their gametes out into the water, hopefully helping to seed other populations around Honduras and maybe even further away. You've also got the extensive mangrove lagoons lining the edge of the bay, which we know are super important as nursery habitats for fish. And in the short time I've been working in Tela, we've seen some incredible larger animals, manatees, fin whale, hammerhead shark, bull shark, all these incredible species that are really important to conservation. So my answer to why it's important to protect Tela is when you have somewhere this unique and somewhere that we still don't understand that much about, it makes it 10 times more important, 100 times more important to protect it, because we could be protecting these unique elements of a reef, and it could well prove the difference in 100 years' time as to whether we've done the job of protecting reefs in general.
I know I'm going to put you in a little bit of a difficult spot here, but maybe you can tell us some of the theories that have come up of why this reef is resilient to bleaching, why these species are probably not affected, or maybe they were affected, they came back. You know, there's so much talk about this reef, and there's so many different questions that are not answered that are being looked by your organization and by the people who come here and are doing research every year. Hopefully you'll be here next year also, or this year now in 2021.
That's the plan.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. So maybe you can tell us some of these hypotheses that we have right now about the reef.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm an English scientist. I just need to have a sip of tea. Yes, I mean, we've got quite a few theories so far. The coral on the reef here in Tela is dominated by what we, quite fast-growing species that are very good at colonizing areas very quickly. But that doesn't really tell us why the reef is so successful, because if that was the reason, then all the other reefs would be seeing a similar type of coral growing. There are lots of theories out there that murky water that's what we call high turbidity, so cloudy water, can help protect corals from bleaching because it stops the light levels from going down and causing damage to the coral. It could well be that that's part of what we're seeing, and it could be that Tela is an example of what coral reefs will look like in the future, and another reason why it's really important that we protect them. When it comes to the urchins, we still don't really know. What we think probably has happened is the way these corals have grown on the reef in Tela, it's provided the perfect habitat for these urchins. And these urchins have then helped protect the reef, which has allowed the corals to get even more, which has then helped the urchins grow and grow and grow. So you've got this lovely mutualistic relationship happening where the corals and the urchins are helping each other to develop the reef into what it is now. For other things that are happening in the bay, like the Acropora palmata, I have absolutely no idea. It baffles me. There's a lot of work still to be done on that.
I've also heard some people say that possibly, the Caribbean is in the Mesoamerican area is in real danger of disappearing as we know it, and the corals in the Caribbean are in danger of disappearing as we know them in the next 10 to 15 years. And reefs like these that have these conditions that help them thrive in waters that are more murky and are protected by UV light, which protects them in turn from bleaching, might be some of the last reefs in the Caribbean. Is there any truth to that, or is there any possibility that's something that we should be concerned about?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge amount of evidence for that, not just in the Caribbean or the Mesoamerican, but around the world. A lot of big coral reef scientists predicting that if things carry on the way they are, there may be no coral reefs left as we know them in 50 to 100 years' time. The Caribbean is naturally more challenging for coral reefs than other parts of the world already, so it's already kind of got those extra pressures on it. But I think there's a very good chance that unless we start improving conservation, the Mesoamerican reef probably doesn't have a huge amount of time left. And what's really fascinating about Tela is it also raises the possibility that there could be loads of other reefs out there in similar types of places that we just haven't looked for yet. And what we can do is we can learn from the reef in Tela and start to predict where these other reefs might be. And it could be that in all these other murky water bays around the Caribbean, there are these other really cool reefs that have developed over time. And it might be that that's where the reefs are in the future.
I've heard that they've discovered some new reefs that look kind of like the ones we have here in Colombia and near the Amazon River. Have you heard anything about that, or do you have any knowledge about that?
I've seen some video footage of the reefs in Colombia and down in Brazil. There's certainly been a lot of discoveries recently of reefs in places that we wouldn't expect them. And reefs grow quite slowly. Okay, even a fast-growing reef is going to take decades and decades to get going. So these reefs haven't suddenly appeared. They've been there all along. It's just that we've been looking in the wrong places. So I think discovering places like Tela is a really key part of our conservation strategy for the future, and trying to understand where reefs really are now so we can understand where they might be in the future.
And before we go, do you have any message you want to tell people about coral reefs and why the common person that will never go to the ocean, lives somewhere up in a mountain, should care about coral reefs, and why everybody should care about coral reefs?
Yeah, I mean, every ecosystem on this planet is connected, and whether you live near the ocean, on the ocean, or nowhere near the ocean, what happens in the ocean does affect you. It affects the air that you breathe, it affects the food that you eat, and overall it affects global society. The number of people that rely on coral reefs for their food is in the hundreds of millions, possibly even billions, huge, huge numbers. And when we think of the fact that coral reefs cover less than 2% of the ocean, so they're a tiny ecosystem really globally, but they support something like 1 in 7 people on the planet. They're home to 30% of all the species we find in the ocean, concentrated in these little areas. They provide protection against hurricane damage. All the houses that are washed away during tsunamis would have been protected if coral reefs had been healthier. So I think regardless of where you live, changing your behavior and trying to think in a way that is environmentally friendly will ultimately help reefs in the same way as it will help all of the other ecosystems. So everyone can do their bit, whether they think it or not.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for taking your time. And we hope to see you soon.
Oh, yeah, I hope so too.
Bye.
See you later. Bye, Antel.